October 25th, 2023, Lewiston, Maine. It was a typical Wednesday evening in this quiet, resilient, blue-collar city. The kind of night where routines unfolded without a second thought, where people sought comfort in familiar places. At just-in-time recreation, the air hummed with the cheerful clatter of bowling pins, the laughter of children, and the murmur of friendly competition. Families were unwinding, league bowlers were perfecting their game, and the scent of pizza mingled with the faint aroma of shoe polish. Just a few miles away at Schemge's Bar and Grill, the atmosphere was equally relaxed. Friends gathered around pool tables, catching up over drinks, enjoying the simple camaraderie that defined their community. Both were havens, slices of normalcy in a world that often felt anything but. But that sense of peace, that everyday safety, was about to be obliterated in a wave of unimaginable terror. Around 6:56 p.m., the tranquil sounds of the bowling alley were violently shattered by the deafening crack of gunfire. Chaos erupted instantaneously. The sharp, concussive blasts echoed through the building, replacing laughter with screams. People froze, then dove for cover, scrambling under tables, behind lanes, anywhere they could find a semblance of safety. The air filled with panicked shouts and the sickening thud of bodies falling. In mere minutes, this place of innocent recreation became a horrific scene of carnage. 7 lives were extinguished, and more were brutally wounded, their dreams and futures extinguished in an instant. The attacker, a shadow of calculated menace, wasn't done. He moved with chilling efficiency. Within minutes, the same terror descended upon Schemge's Bar and Grill. The unsuspecting patrons, caught off guard, suddenly found themselves in a living nightmare. The rapid succession of gunshots tore through the relaxed atmosphere, turning tables over, shattering glass, and claiming the lives of 8 more individuals. The methodical brutality suggested not a random act, but a cold, deliberate intent to inflict maximum devastation. The first 911 calls flooded emergency lines, frantic and incoherent. Shots fired. Multiple victims. He's still shooting. The speed and scale of the attack overwhelmed the small city's emergency services. Police cruisers, sirens wailing, raced towards the scenes, their officers bracing for the unimaginable. Paramedics, their faces grim, began the desperate task of triaging the wounded amidst the fallen. As the initial reports filtered out, the horrifying truth began to sink in. Lewiston, Maine, had just become the site of a mass casualty event, a wound ripped open in the heart of their quiet community. The death toll, already staggering, would tragically continue to climb, leaving a city in shock, grief, and an agonizing, profound sense of violation. As the sirens wailed and the wounded were rushed to local hospitals, the grim reality of the massacre began to sink in. Within hours, law enforcement had identified the primary suspect, Robert Card, a 40-year-old U.S. Army reservist. His image, a stocky man with glasses, a receding hairline, and an unsettlingly blank stare, was immediately plastered across every news outlet. The horror deepened for the residents of Lewiston. The shooter wasn't some anonymous outsider. He was one of their own, a local man, whose face was now synonymous with unspeakable violence. The first crucial lead came swiftly, but offered little comfort. Card's distinctive white Subaru was found abandoned at a boat launch near the Androscoggin River in Lisbon, a neighboring town. This discovery immediately shifted the entire focus of the manhunt. The river, with its winding tributaries and dense, rugged wilderness along its banks, suggested a terrifying possibility. Card hadn't just fled, he had vanished into the vast, unforgiving Maine woods. He was a trained firearms instructor, familiar with the outdoors, making him an even more formidable and dangerous target. What followed was an unprecedented manhunt that brought central Maine to a standstill. Hundreds of law enforcement officers, from local police departments, the Maine State Police, the FBI, and other federal agencies converged on the area. K-9 units scoured the forests, helicopters buzzed overhead, their powerful searchlights cutting through the darkness, while boats navigated the cold river waters. Drones equipped with thermal cameras flew silent missions above the tree line. The entire state of Maine held its breath, gripped by a fear it had never known. Lewiston and several surrounding towns were immediately placed under an unprecedented shelter-in-place order. Streets became ghost towns, schools were locked down, and businesses pulled down their shutters. Residents hunkered down in their homes, terrified to even glance out their windows, clinging to every news update and praying for the capture of the man who had shattered their sense of security. The pervasive fear was palpable. An armed, unstable individual was still at large, possibly hiding just beyond their sight, a phantom lurking in the shadows. Days bled into agonizing nights. The search effort was exhaustive, relentless, yet yielded no sign of Robert Card. The longer he remained at large, the more amplified the terror became. Every rustle in the leaves, every distant sound, seemed to carry the ominous whisper of a threat. The Lewiston Massacre had not only claimed lives, but had stolen the peace of an entire region, leaving behind a chilling void and an agonizing wait for the resolution that seemed to forever elude them. As the manhunt for Robert Card intensified, a far more chilling narrative began to emerge, one that spoke not just of a lone gunman, but of a system that had tragically missed numerous, glaring warning signs. Robert Card was not an unknown entity. He was a 40-year-old U.S. Army reservist, a trained firearms instructor, a man whose life had been meticulously documented by both military and civilian authorities. This background, far from offering comfort, only deepened the agonizing question: how could this have happened? The answers began to surface, painting a disturbing picture of a man in a rapid, escalating mental health crisis. Reports from his family and fellow reservists detailed increasingly bizarre behavior. Card had begun expressing paranoid delusions, believing people were talking about him, that his family was conspiring against him. He made threats, specifically towards his unit at the Army Reserve, and chillingly, towards a bowling alley and a bar, the very types of establishments he would later target. The military was acutely aware of his deteriorating state. In the summer of 2023, just months before the massacre, Card was reportedly hospitalized for 2 weeks for a mental health evaluation. Fellow soldiers, deeply concerned by his erratic behavior and threats, had even reported him to their superiors. The system, it seemed, had been notified. Local police had also been called to conduct welfare checks on Card on multiple occasions, sometimes at the direct request of his worried family or military colleagues. Maine even had a yellow flag law, a legal mechanism designed to temporarily remove firearms from individuals deemed a danger to themselves or others, provided certain procedures were followed, including a medical evaluation and a court order. Yet, despite these clear red flags, despite the documented threats and the obvious mental distress, the yellow flag law was not fully utilized in Card's case. His firearms, including the assault-style rifle that would later be used to devastating effect, remained in his possession. This critical failure became a central, infuriating question for the victims' families and a bewildered public. How could a man with such a documented history of mental instability and violent threats retain legal access to weapons? The system, designed to protect, appeared to have failed catastrophically. The ghost shooter wasn't just a phantom in the woods. He was a tragic consequence of warnings unheeded, a crisis overlooked, and a devastating testament to the profound gaps in a safety net that should have caught him long before that fateful night in Lewiston. The relentless, desperate search for Robert Card stretched into its 3rd day. The entire region remained under an unprecedented lockdown, a chilling silence hanging over towns usually bustling with life. Schools were closed, businesses shuttered, and residents huddled indoors, their eyes glued to news reports, praying for an end to the nightmare. The pressure on the hundreds of law enforcement officers, tirelessly combing through the vast Maine wilderness, was immense. Fatigue gnawed at them, but the image of Lewiston's victims and the knowledge that a dangerous killer was still at large fueled their grim determination. Then, a critical lead emerged. Investigators, meticulously piecing together Card's life, turned their attention to locations familiar to him. A specific area of interest materialized, a recycling center in Lisbon, where Card had previously worked. This location, a maze of machinery, scrap metal, and hidden nooks, suggested a deliberate, calculated attempt to hide in plain sight, in a place he knew intimately. On Friday, October 27, 2023, after a harrowing 48-hour manhunt, the search finally culminated in this industrial site. As officers meticulously cleared the property, they made the grim discovery. Inside a large, unmarked trailer tucked away amongst discarded equipment, they found Robert Card's body. He had died by a self-inflicted gunshot wound. News of Card's death spread like wildfire, bringing a complex wave of emotions across Maine and the nation. There was immense relief that the immediate threat was over, that the ghost shooter was no longer lurking in the shadows, potentially ready to strike again. The agonizing weight, the fear that had paralyzed an entire state, had finally ended. However, this relief was profoundly tempered by a deep, aching sadness and frustration. With Card's death, the possibility of ever truly understanding his motives, of confronting him in a court of law, vanished. There would be no trial, no public testimony, no direct answers to the agonizing why that haunted the victims' families. Questions lingered even at the scene of his discovery. How long had he been in that trailer? What were his final thoughts? His suicide, while ending the physical threat, left a gaping void in the pursuit of full accountability and closure, turning the focus once again to the systemic failures that allowed this tragedy to unfold. With Robert Card's death, the immediate terror gripping Maine subsided, but a profound and lasting grief settled over Lewiston. The focus now shifted from the hunt for the killer to honoring the lives tragically cut short. The 18 victims were not mere statistics. They were beloved family members, cherished friends, pillars of their community. Tributes poured in, detailing their passions, their kindness, their dreams. Their faces, once vibrant with life, became solemn reminders of the immense, irreplaceable loss inflicted upon their families, and a city forever scarred. Memorials sprang up, covered in flowers, candles, and tearful notes, a collective testament to the innocent lives stolen. As the community began the slow, arduous process of healing, a fierce demand for accountability arose. The discovery of Card's extensive history of mental health struggles and the numerous documented warning signs tragically unheeded sparked outrage. Questions mounted. How could a system designed to protect its citizens fail so catastrophically? Why was Maine's yellow flag law, intended to disarm dangerous individuals, not fully utilized? How did the U.S. Army Reserve, aware of Card's escalating delusions and threats, not prevent him from accessing firearms? In response to public outcry, multiple official investigations were launched. Independent commissions, legislative hearings, and internal reviews by military and law enforcement agencies began the painstaking process of dissecting every decision, every missed opportunity. The goal was not just to understand what happened, but how to prevent such a tragedy from ever happening again. These inquiries aimed to uncover systemic failures, from mental health care access to gun control loopholes and interagency communication breakdowns. For Lewiston, the road to recovery is long and fraught with emotional scars. The massacre left an indelible mark, shattering its sense of security and trust. Yet, amidst the profound grief, stories of resilience, community solidarity, and unwavering support for the victims' families began to emerge. The city united in its sorrow, determined to rebuild, but forever changed by the horror it endured. The why behind Robert Card's rampage remains a haunting, elusive question. While his reign of terror ended with his suicide, the full extent of his delusions, the precise trigger for his actions, and the exact points where the safety net failed may never be definitively answered. The tragedy of Lewiston, Maine, stands as a chilling testament to the complex interplay between mental illness, gun violence, and the desperate, ongoing need for a more robust, responsive, and accountable system. The memory of the 18 lives lost serves as a perpetual, somber echo, a stark reminder of the devastating consequences when warnings are missed and a ghost shooter slips through the cracks.